So in our third video, we're going to do some additional modeling. We're going to add some rocks to the site and also add a tree. So the rock we're going to make in a separate Max file. So I open up Max, new file here. I'm going to go customize unit setup and change the units to decimal inches. And I'm just making those smaller so that it's easier to work with this small geometry. I'm just going to have a small 8-inch rock that I'm going to make here. And in my Create panel, I'm clicking on Geosphere. And I'm just going to click and drag and put that geosphere, in my perspective view. Usually easier to just throw it in there and then size it. So I hit F4 there to turn the edge faces on. And now I can go into the Modify panel. So just make sure your object is selected. First I'm hitting G on my keyboard in each viewport to turn the grid off. It just makes it a little easier to see. I go under Modify here, and the radius of that geosphere is going to change to 8 inches. And then lower right corner, I'm doing a zoom. Zoom extents basically on all the views. So lower right corner, like that top row of settings. And under segments, I'm going to go to 10 segments, adds more geometry. Gives us more to modify. And then real world map size, I'm going to turn that off. We're just going to put a very basic material on here. And that sets the basic shape of my rock. Now I'm going to go under the modifier list. And these are all the different 3D modifiers that you can do to basically change the geometry of any object you're working on. And I'm going to add a noise modifier. And noise is just going to add some deformation, just going to deform randomly the surface of our model here. So once the noise modifier is on, I'm turning fractal on. That'll give me just more random settings in there. Under strength on the x-axis, I'm going 6 inches. Strength on the y, going 12 inches. Strength along the z-axis, I'll go 3 inches. And you can just see how that's just deforming that geosphere, so it's not a perfectly symmetrical sphere. It's basically like pushing down on it. So we're just adding, again, just some random elements to that geometry. And then on top of the modifier stack, I change the name to Rock 1. It's always a good habit to name your objects so that later when you merge the object into another scene, such as our Revit model, it'll be easier to find. And now I'm going under my scale command here, and the little fly out, I'm going under the last scale, so it's the squash type of scale. Squash basically keeps the geometry, the volume of the geometry in place. So I'm going over the z-axis and just left clicking and just basically squashing that along the z-axis. And you can work with the different axes on here and just squash them in along different axes. If you go on one of the triangles, you're going across 2 different axes. So again, we're just trying to add some randomness to it so it looks more like a rock. And I'm going to add a basic material in here. I just clicked M on my keyboard, brought up the material editor. And since we're in the design ray, what they call it, mental ray design default user interface, these are the materials that show up. I'm just going to add just this gray material, just default. Arch and design material. We'll be doing more materials later. In my perspective view, I want to get rid of those edge faces just so we can see it a little easier. So I'm just hitting F4 on the keyboard. And now we have our rock. So it's just got a simple, shiny kind of material on there. And that'll be a good start. And now we're going to merge that into our Revit model. Now I've opened up the Revit model we imported before, and I'm going to do a file merge, and I'm going to merge that rock in that we just created. Now any geometry that's a 3D Studio Max file, a .max file format, can be merged into a scene. So I've just navigated out to it. Now here in my merge dialog box, I have to select the object I want to merge, otherwise nothing will merge, and then click OK. So now the geometry has been added inside my model. And what can be sometimes tricky is you don't really know where in 3D space that went. So I can kind of pan around. I can see now that rock kind of ended at very low elevation there. So it's basically underneath my model. So I want to move that into position. Now I could manually move it. If I have a rough idea of where I want it to be, I clicked on the move icon. I'm going to add an X coordinate here. Let me try about a minus 82 feet. Going to bring it over in the X direction. In the Y direction, let me go about a negative 3 foot 6 inches. And my z-axis, this will probably be off. I'll probably have to manually move it, but let me try. I'm going to go minus 3 foot 6 inches there also for the height. And yeah, so the height is still off, so I'm just going to manually move it into position. Usually you're working on a model, you know a good idea of your coordinate system. This one here, wasn't sure what the elevation was. I'm just going to move that up and into position. So our idea is here, we're just going to add some rocks in the outside front here of our site. A few rocks in there, later we'll add more. There's going to ultimately be like a pond out here, so we'll have a little water. So just preparing for that, give a little more geometry in the scene. So I've merged that in. You can see how it works on the site. Always look in different views to make sure the model isn't, kind of overlapping the mesh of anything, so just making sure it's not overlapped anywhere on that site. And what I'm going to do is also clone this. I want to have several rocks in here, so I'll just clone it a few times. Use my arc rotate here to get it kind of more into position. So I can go into my move command, and with move, all I got to do is hold down shift and then move along one of your axes, and that's going to clone the object. Now here I want to copy it. I want it to be a unique copy. Instance would mean any change I make to one of the objects will change the others. And I'm going to do a total of 3 copies. So number of copy, I'll do 3. Notice how it just adds another number incrementally to the rock. So now I've got 3 more rocks in there. Right now they're all identical, and they're just called rock 01, 02, 03, 04. If I go back to my rock 02, I want to add something to this geometry so it's a little more random. So with rock 2, I'm going to go under seed, under the parameters in the modifier, and add a seed of 1. Basically that just takes your noise distortion and randomizes it differently. Then I'll go to my next rock, which is going to be rock 3. Again, I'm going to go into the modify panel. Under seed, we'll give this a different number. So seed of 2. Again, you can see it kind of shift there, so it's just randomizing that noise. And for rock 4, I'm going to go seed 3, and again, randomizing that one also. So seed is basically just a way to change the noise that's being applied to an object. And then now I'm going to go to my scale command. And each one of these I'm just going to scale up and down a little bit along some different axes just to make each one a little different size. So you can see in your scale gizmo, you can either scale it along one of the axes, X, Y, or Z, or you can go on one of those triangles and scale it along 2 axes. So I'm just randomly going in, changing the size of them. Again, trying to make this look more natural so that each rock is a little different. And then just using the move command, moving them together. We're going to go into rotate. Rotate gizmo allows you to rotate along each of the axes, X, Y, and Z. So I'm just rotating the rocks around a little bit. Again, just adding some random elements to it here. So I could have modeled any kind of element in a separate max file, merged it in. So this is a good process for any kind of modeling that you want to additionally add to this Revit model. And just double checking things, make sure they're all fitting there properly. And that's the end of part 1 of our 2-part video.